Always muse to artists and poets alike, the moon is both a marvel and an enigma. As Chinese philosopher Deng Mindao once so colorfully said, "The moon does not fight, it attacks no one, it does not worry, it does not try to crush others. It keeps its course, but by its very nature, it gently influences." What other body could pull an entire ocean from shore to shore? So let's talk about the child we never wanted, the moon.
The moon.
Or reluctantly had, I should say. It was a very violent birth.
We're stuck with it.
The best accepted theory of our moon's formation is that a Mars-sized object, billions of years ago, crashed into Earth, known as Theia, and all the crap that flew out recoalesced and formed our moon.
This was back at the time when the solar system was still very much under construction.
All that bombardment.
Yep. And a big thing comes along, smacks into the Earth, creates another little piece, and spins off into what we see now.
Which is our moon.
Yeah.
And there's evidence for this because it shares similar isotopes.
It does. Yes, there are isotopes in the lunar soil that are identical to Earth. And if we look at the minerals, we can see that those minerals are very similar to Earth minerals. So it all looks like we're all part and parcel of the same thing.
It's actually helped us quite a bit because it's stabilized Earth.
Yes, indeed. We've been able to tell that at one point in Earth's history, a day on Earth was only 8 hours.
Wow.
Now we're down to 24 hours. And the moon has played a big role in helping to slow down the rotation, as you mentioned. But the other cool thing about the moon being there is it's brought us the joy and pleasure of being able to see eclipses.
Right. We are very lucky to have them now. As far as I've read and know, we're the only planet that has total solar eclipses. If you were standing on another planet that had a moon, even if it eclipsed the sun, it doesn't give you totality. And that's really special. The ratios just had to be right. It's probably the most obvious thing about watching the moon over time is that you see it go through phases, which is essentially part of the moon gets lit up by the sun and the rest of it is in shadow.
That's right. And we see those different parts of the moon's illumination as it makes its orbit around the Earth. If you were to study the phases of the moon or how it changes from month to month, what you would see is that the moon starts out in the evening sky just after sunset at its newest phase. You see a very, very thin crescent moon hanging in the western sky low. But if you were to watch every day, you'd see how that piece grows and grows and grows from day to day. After a while, you'd lose it in the evening sky because it's now rising later than you're up. But that also means on the other end, it's setting after you wake up in the morning.
Right.
So that then puts it in the sky where you could see it during the day. And as it turns out, there's only about 2 to 3 days in the course of the moon's cycle when you can't see the moon. But you really have to be diligent about going out to look for the moon every day at about the same time so that you can put all the pieces together.
Right. And one cycle of the moon is about 29 days.
9.5 days. And then that fits comfortably into this time period we call a
month.
Which is where the name month actually originally comes from.
That's right.
Is from a moon cycle.
A lot of stuff comes from the moon, like the word lunacy.
Oh, yes.
Speaking of full moons and phases, and people felt something when there was a full moon in the sky. It's just an excuse.
It's a great
for
excuse.
erratic behavior.
It sounds good.
That's right.
But it's not true.
But it's not true,
We're
exactly.
not affected in that way. When people see the moon as being full, they think it has a much more magnified effect, right? And when we look at the tidal situation here, it's all about where the moon is in its orbit around the planet and how the Earth rotates underneath the moon every day. So what's actually happening with the tides is that the gravitational pull of the moon is pulling on the water of the planet. And at the same time, we can't forget that the sun is also pulling equally. So, we have this activity going on that creates the tide. So as the Earth rotates every 24 hours, we have high tide and low tide. Now, what also helps to amplify those tides is our distance from the moon. So if we're at perigee when the moon is closer to us, then it can have a bigger effect than when the moon is at apogee, which is further away. So all of these things tie in together.
That made me think too of timing. A lot, being Indian, Eastern cultures, we base our calendars on lunar cycles. Even holidays will fall on a very different day from year to year because it depends more on the moon than like an exact cyclical date as opposed to Western calendar.
You're right. There are a lot of cultures that have built their calendars around the lunar cycle, and those calendars still exist today. They're still applied today. And we've created a civil calendar to work with the sort of like financial and business mechanisms of the planet. But that lunar calendar still plays a huge role in many religious festivals and celebrations right to this day.
We're tidally locked with the moon. And is that why we only ever see one side of it?
Yeah,
Yes.
over time, the evolution between these two bodies is that the moon has now fallen into a synchronicity with the Earth in which one side faces the Earth. Now, it's not that the moon doesn't rotate on its axis. It does. It just rotates at the same speed that it goes around our planet. So it seems as if it doesn't rotate, but we always see the same side.
Right, because if it never did rotate, then we would actually end up seeing the other side, known as the far side.
Right, or as most people like to refer to it, the dark side of the moon,
side.
which within itself is a misnomer because that side of the moon does get sunlight.
That's right.
We just never see it.
Just never see it. It wasn't until the Apollo astronauts that humans ever actually saw the other side.
That's true. One aspect of the moon that people really don't pay very much attention to, I think because it's not as obvious on the moon as it is here, is that there is a very, very thin atmosphere on the moon. I mean, like barely molecules thick, but there is some atmosphere there on the moon.
Yeah. It's trying.
It's trying. Yeah, that's true, but it's never going to develop into anything like what we have here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I feel like people looking for future ventures on the moon, because it would be a great base, because its gravity is shorter, if you're, let's say, wanting to get to Mars, it would be a great place to get to and fuel up and then hop from there to the next place you want to go.
It would be.
So I think for future development, whether it be through NASA or privately funded ventures, is to set up bases on the moon for a place to fuel rockets to get even further.
But you're onto a really cool thing about using the lunar soil as a resource for all kinds of things that would be needed for further flight into the solar system.
But as all things in the universe, they don't last forever. And our moon is drifting away from us. It's a very small number, I think like a centimeter a year, if even that.
Yeah.
But that still means it's receding. So not only are we not going to get to have total solar eclipses down the line, but one day we will no longer have a moon. But I believe it's going to happen after our sun dies anyway. So we might not have to worry
It's
about it.
a long enough time out that we don't have to be concerned about it.
Yes.
But it is having an effect on the Earth as it slowly moves away.
Better it drift away than crash into us, though, right?
Yeah, I think you're right about that.
Probably.
Sure. Well, the good thing is, though, for as long as it seems that humans are going to be here on this planet, we'll always have
still
that
okay.
comforting sight, looking up in the sky to see the moon, even though it'll get smaller and smaller and smaller.
It's kind of sad to think about, especially because it's been our savior over time, right? Taken so many bombardments that could have been directed to Earth.
And just think about it. For all of the time that humans have been on this planet, the one thing we've been able to clearly look up and see in the sky has been the moon.
Our closest celestial neighbor.
It certainly has been.
So cheesy.
That was so cheesy.
So dumb.
But true.
But true.